As you know, wildfires are simply part of life in the West, and managing our land to improve resiliency needs to be a focus of ours in this Congress. That's why I'm pleased as a member of the Agriculture Committee to say that the Farm Bill reauthorizes stewardship contracting, which allows our federal land management agencies to implement high-priority forest management and restoration projects. Much of the presiding officer's career has had to do with these programs, and I thank him for his support and have been pleased to be able to carry on his work as a member of the Agriculture Committee. This is a critical tool for initiatives that restore and maintain healthy forest ecosystems, provide local employment. The presiding officer, I think, was on the floor maybe yesterday just talking about the importance of this to our timber industry in Colorado and across this country. Another truly Western aspect of this bill I'd like to focus on tonight is conservation, specifically the stewardship of our Western landscape. In my travels around Colorado, I've been heartened to see over and over again farmers and ranchers arm in arm with conservation groups and with sportsmen, all in the name of proper stewardship of the land, of protecting our open spaces, who all share the recognition that keeping these landscapes in their historical, undeveloped state is an economic driver, as family farms, as working cattle ranches, for tourism, for wildlife habitat, and to preserve our rural way of life and our rural economies. Mr. President, every citizen knows that the American West is a destination for those seeking wide open spaces, a home on the range, as once was said, a way of life that's focused on working the land and the wise stewardship of our natural resources. We also know that we've grown as a country, that there have been increasing development pressure on this way of life and on the landscape. That pressure is exactly why the Farm Bill's conservation title is so vital to people in the West. I serve as chairman of the Conservation Subcommittee of the Senate Agriculture Committee, and through the dozens, literally dozens, of Farm Bill listening sessions I've held over the last 18 months, farmers and ranchers were always talking about the importance of conservation of their way of life and conservation of their land, particularly the use of conservation easements, which help landowners voluntarily conserve the farming and ranching heritage of their land, a heritage that is so important to our state and to the entire West. So I wanted to spend a few minutes sharing some of the stories that Coloradans have shared with me, and maybe more important than that, showing our colleagues what this looks like. Of course, we live in the most beautiful state of all 50 states in Colorado. This photo is from the Music Meadows Ranch outside of Westcliff, Colorado, elevation 9,000 feet. On these beautiful 4,000 acres, Ellen Ganschow raises some of the finest grass-fed beef in the country. And thanks to the Grassland Reserve Program, Ellen's Ranch has now has a permanent conservation easement. So this beautiful land will likely always have someone running cattle over it. This photo is from the San Luis Valley, Mr. President, where my predecessor, Ken Salazar, is from. 15 different conservation easements finalized by the Colorado Cattlemen's Agricultural Land Trust protect nearly all of the private land over a 20-mile stretch in the valley. The great work of the Cattlemen's Ag Land Trust, aided by the programs in the Farm Bill conservation title before us, are protecting our Western way of life in Colorado. This beautiful picture is also in the valley. This is not a movie set, by the way. This is how we live our lives in the great state of Colorado and why these programs have been so important. Finally, I wanted to share one more Colorado story about preserving our state's fruit orchards. Most people don't know this as I've traveled the country, and I imagine Senators Isaacson and Chambliss from Georgia might even be surprised to hear that Colorado is a national leader in the production of peaches. This is a peach orchard in Palisade. My friends from California might also be interested to know that Colorado has a burgeoning wine industry as well. In Colorado's Grand Valley, pictured here, conservation programs have been efficiently employed to protect 14 family farms growing peaches and wine grapes, among other things. The federal investments made available to protect these lands have not only ensured that they will stay in agricultural production, but the resources provided from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, help these family farms acquire new land to plant and new equipment to plant it. Mr. President, as you can see, and as you already know, conservation is an integral part of what we're all about in the West. It helps define who we are. Sometimes people only focus on conserving public land in its undeveloped state, and that's an important endeavor in Colorado and across the West. But private lands conservation, the type aided by the Farm Bill, is critical for so many reasons: to protect the agricultural heritage of the land, and for wildlife habitat, elk, bighorn sheep, pheasant, Colorado cutthroat trout, the list goes on and on. So many of the prized species that are important to our nation's sportsmen and nature lovers. Finding open landscapes and the species that inhabit them are a fundamental part of what it is to be in the West. We need to preserve these open spaces, and that's what this title does. I strongly support this new conservation title as reported out of the committee in a bipartisan vote. I know some would look to amend this bipartisan consensus, to cut conservation resources in the name of deficit reduction or to apply it to some other purpose. And I'm the first to say that we need to cut our deficit. We need to put the entire budget under a microscope, including agriculture, to cut waste and eliminate redundancies. And by the way, we have. This committee, the Senate Agriculture Committee, under the leadership of the chairman and the ranking member, is the only committee that I'm aware of in this entire Congress, the House or the Senate, that's actually come up with a bipartisan consensus on deficit reduction. And I want to thank the ranking member and the chairwoman for their leadership on this, for setting a model, an example for the other committees that are working or should be working to get our deficit under control. And I might say that $6.4 billion of those cuts do come from conservation, not all of which I like. But we made difficult compromises at the committee level. We have a more efficient conservation title that won support from both sides of the aisle, and we ought to move this bill forward. Now, I know there's been a little bit of the usual back and forth here about amendments that aren't necessarily related to the topic at hand, and we have a habit of doing that in the Senate. I hope that there can be an agreement reached by the leadership so that we can move this critically important bill forward. Again, at a time when so much partisan bickering is going on around this place, to have seen the fine work that was done by this committee, Republicans and Democrats working together to strengthen this commodity tile, create real deficit reduction, and actually end direct payments to producers, one of the most significant reforms in agriculture policy that we've had around this place in decades. It would be a shame, worse than a shame. It would be terrible to let that work go to waste. And with that, Mr. President, the hour is late. I'm going to stop so that we can close, but I want to thank you very much and say again what a privilege it was to be able to talk about our home with you in the chair. So with that, Mr. President, I'll yield the floor.